Hey, homeberries. Well, thankfully my head is feeling a lot better than it was earlier. So since I have a little time, I thought I'd make a quick video. Sometimes there's a show or an episode that a lot of people feel some way about, and then you feel differently. For instance, there may be an episode of something a lot of people say, "Oh, that was a great episode," and either you didn't like it or you just think, whatever. Then on the other hand, there may be an episode people say, "Oh, that was a bad episode," and either you like the episode or again you don't really care. I can think of two episodes that a lot of people didn't like, but I thought were good. One is an episode of Batman the Animated Series. Like I've said, I think that it's the best superhero cartoon ever made, called The Last Laugh. I'll probably do a review video on that too. A lot of people think, "Oh, well, this was weird," and it's one of my favorite episodes. Then there's what I'm going to talk about tonight. There's an episode of SpongeBob a lot of people found gross, but it's actually one of my favorite episodes, at least as far as, they have the dark age of SpongeBob. I didn't watch a lot of that, but from what I did watch, my favorite was this episode, and it's called Greasy Buffoons. So there was, it opened up at the Krusty Krab, and someone, I'm guessing SpongeBob, it's been a while since I've seen it, slipped on the floor and spilled the customer's order. Turned out there was grease on the floor. They had a grease trap. It was like this big, almost like a column of grease in the basement. I'm pretty sure that's not how grease traps work, but I'll have to watch some of those bad instructional video. No, what are they called? The videos. Like, "Oh, you're an employee of this restaurant, so do these things and try not to spill the barrel of hot grease on yourself." Those kind of instructional videos. So it had gotten so full that it was seeping up through the floorboards. Mr. Krabs said, "Well, this will take 2 employees who can work extra hours and not get paid." So of course Squidward dipped out. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob, I guess, rented a truck and collected the grease to dispose of it. So SpongeBob asked how they were going to dispose of it, and Mr. Krabs had a solution. All it was just dumping the grease onto the chum bucket grounds. SpongeBob asked, "Are you sure that was legal?" And Krabs, "Legal? So Plankton went out, I think, to take out the trash next day, and he slipped in the grease. Says, "Oh, it's disgusting." "Oh, but it tastes great." So that gave him an idea. He seasoned his chummy patties, whatever they were called, with grease, and I believe he came up with like improved chum or whatever it was. So then they were eating at the Bikini Bottomites were eating at the chum bucket. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob didn't know what was going on, but they figured out what was happening. So Mr. Krabs told SpongeBob, "From now on, with every patty, I want you to fry 2 patties. One for the Krabby Patty, and one just for the grease." So they had Krabby Patties with twice the flavor. So there was Plankton lying on his stomach and spying through his spy scope. Said, probably, I'm just going to call it a spyglass anyway. And yes, the review could not have continued unless I changed my wording. And he said, "Oh, I see now what crabs means, but I'm not going to take this lying down." And he realized he was lying on his stomach and he stood up. So then they had the chum with quadruple the flavor. So you realize, well, this is escalating quickly. So Mr. Krabs came in and demanded SpongeBob make more greasy patties. Says, "Don't turn off the stove." "Well, Mr. Krabs, I haven't had the stove off, but I could turn it off even less than that." Well, Mr. Krabs was mulling that over when he slipped and fell into some buns. "Oh, what are these?" "Oh, those are some buns I accidentally dropped in the grease and haven't had time to pick up yet. They've been soaking in there for an hour." So then they served the grease-soaked buns, an hour's worth of flavor in every bite. Plankton said, "Oh, wait until he sees my new invention," and got this bit out of the fryer. Karen, the computer, noted, "My sensors indicate that's just a fried grease crumbs." "Exactly," and they sold it as crispity crunchities, I think. Well, I think that's actually something you can get on the menu at Long John Silver's, by the way, in some places. So then Mr. Krabs is walking along with grease on a paper plate, and Squidward, "Oh, P.U., Mr. Krabs." "Huh? Don't you usually flush that stuff down the toilet?" "So this is our latest menu item. Straight up grease on a paper plate." And Squidward told him, "Well, I give you points for honesty." So then they marketed it as something like wow soup or yum soup. I forget exactly. So there was poor SpongeBob in the kitchen sweating and forced to serve up these ladles of hot grease. Well, he realized how bad things were getting. He saw the customers out of shape, and I should note they throughout the episode they had been showing the customers getting more bloated and unhealthy. So there was poor Patrick swollen and grotesque, like, "Oh, Chris." So SpongeBob finally had enough. He called the health inspector. They arrived in monster trucks. This was basically a monster boat because the boat had monster truck wheels, and the health inspector had a hazmat suit. Being a health inspector is a risky job in Bikini Bottoms. You look at some of these episodes, like one guy got nearly killed and buried. Another guy got yellow splotches all over his body from eating a tainted Krabby Patty. A spongy patty. I have to make that distinction. Really, I don't blame this guy for showing up in a hazmat suit. So there were puddles of grease everywhere. That's how bad things had gotten. So Mr. Krabs and Plankton were freaking out, and SpongeBob admitted he had called the health inspector. In this segment, I thought was repetitive and not that funny. He kept trying to tell the health inspector they'd been feeding people grease, and Mr. Krabs and Plankton would try to stop him, like by covering his mouth and putting him in a trash can. Finally, they kicked the trash can away to try and prevent him from talking. He said, "Oh, it's just a friendly competition." So finally, SpongeBob was able to tell, "They've been feeding people grease." And the health inspector noted, "Well, I thought I recognized this stench, although I thought maybe one of you two just hadn't showered in a while." Plankton told him, "Officer, I'd just like to say," and he pointed to Mr. Krabs, "this was all his idea." "Oh, really? Well, you'll be happy to know I'll be closing down both your restaurants until you slime balls can clean up your act. Have a good day." He took off, and his monster boat wheels splattered grease all over the two of them. Plankton declared, "Well, I'm off to take a bath," and went off. Though Mr. Krabs was sad about the restaurant being closed down, he said, "There's no way we can get rid of all this grease." SpongeBob said, "Oh, I can help." Oh, it cut to the next scene. Mr. Krabs had fallen asleep. He looked, and there wasn't any more grease. Says, "Oh, it was all a dream." And there was SpongeBob just engorged and dripping grease. "No, it wasn't. I soaked up all the offending substances, and now I'll dispose of them properly." So Mr. Krabs was glad about that. And then Patrick came on and started trying to lick the grease off SpongeBob's. "Oh, crunchity, no, Patrick, get away." So there, SpongeBob was running to, I guess, the grease disposal place with Patrick after him the whole time, and Mr. Krabs just looking like, what is going on? So I should note, I can understand why people don't like this episode, because it does have it has a lot of gross things in it. Normally I don't like gross out at all, but I was able to look past it. I should note, if I thought about it too much, I wouldn't, like, if I could imagine the smell or whatnot of grease, I wouldn't have liked it as much. So that's a big factor, I think. The reason I like it, in addition to not thinking about it too much, is I thought it was such a great satire of the modern fast food industry, because a year or so before this, there were people making there were restaurants introducing menu items that weren't exactly the peak of healthy eating. So I think that's really all I can say about that. So yeah, and someone, you go to these websites and such, and they list errors for episodes. Someone helpfully noted, in real life, grease would not make the food taste better, although it would depend on preference. So, fair enough. So that's it. Have a blessed night, everybody, and may your food have only the amount of grease that you want. So try to stay healthy, everybody.